Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Rock Your Best Life podcast. With me today, I have the wonderful Patti Salomon, and she's actually a local where I live here in Durango, Colorado. And I've been using her wonderful float studio that has helped me so much and my family so much. So I want to have her on. Welcome, Patti.
Thank you so much for including me in this. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, and I wanted to have you on because, I have found a lot of benefit. My husband has found a lot of benefit, and my son has used it just once so far. But and I am always curious, to see how people started, why they do what they do, and then get more information out there about what it is that you do.
Yeah, well, I always say the world would be a much happier place if more people floated because it has such a positive impact on people's lives. And that's how actually my whole business got started. I was living in St. Louis, Missouri, and had a very high stress career. I was in the same job for 30 years. I was a single mom, was very active in my life, but was really feeling fried, both physically and mentally. I just kind of was at my wit's end. And my daughter went off to college in Portland, Oregon, and she discovered floating there and thought it would be really good for me. So she sent me a gift card to float 2 times in St. Louis, which is where I was living. And so that's kind of where it all began. I floated the first time and thought it was really weird and wasn't so sure about it. But I had that second one she had given me, and I was like, well, you know what? She gave me 2. I can't waste it. And the second time I went back was so dramatically different from the first. And it was truly life-changing for me. So I signed up to float the last Sunday of every month. And it's something I put on my calendar. I would look forward to it. It was a great way for me to end the previous month, start a new week, start a new month. So it provided me a lot of really a mental shift. And when she graduated from college and said she was no longer interested in coming back to St. Louis, I didn't know what I was going to do. And my mom had lived in Durango, and I thought, well, I can move to Durango and be closer to my mom, who was getting older. And I thought that might be great. And I really started to think about what I could do here and what meant something to me, what I could give back to the community. And voila, here I am, Salt 360. And I love what I do because people really do change once they start floating regularly. And it just makes my heart warm to know that I am helping in that shift. So that's my backstory.
Yeah, and I love it because, I didn't really know all the great benefits until I experienced it either. And I think it's hard to explain to people because we live in a community where there's a lot of, wellness, companies and a lot of that kind of popping up, but I know that you've been in Durango for a few years, but it took me a while to actually go and do it. It took me a while.
I just got a lot, it's the thought of it really feels scary. I was scared my first time. I mean, it just sounds really weird and scary. And what you find is once you get in there, there's there's no reason to be afraid. You're in full control. You can get out anytime you want. You can leave the door open a crack, so I think once people come in and try it, it really does change the dynamic of what's going on in your brain and your thought process on floating. But really, it is scarier than it sounds, I think.
Yeah. Well, and let's dive deep into it, walk people through, if people don't know what it is, which I really think a lot of people don't really know exactly what it is. Walk people through what it's like to be in a float tank. What do we need to know about it?
Right. So one thing I like to tell people is this is not a new therapy. It's been around since the 50s. The first float tank came out in the late 50s. A lot's changed since then. When the float tanks first came out, they used regular table salt, which they found to burn skin. It was pretty abrasive. So in the 60s, I believe, they changed to Epsom salt.
Mhm.
So currently I use pharmaceutical grade Epsom salt in my tanks. There's 1,000 pounds of salt with 12 inches of water. You don't need a lot of water because you will pop up like a cork. So there's no reason to have any more than 12 inches. You don't need it. There are different types of flotation tanks out there, pods, tanks, clamshells. There's a lot of different ones. I, at Salt 360, have float lab tanks. I really love my tanks. They're very high quality and the rooms are really big. My float rooms are 8 feet by 7 feet by 6 feet. So having that extra space to be able to stretch and even do some yoga moves in there is great. So what
Yeah.
you do, you come in, and I'm a clean freak, as I think most float studios are. You come in and you would take a shower, make sure all the oil's out of your hair and off your body if you have any lotion on it, because we don't want any film in that tank. And then there's a headrest. You just grab your headrest in and you go float. For 60, 75, or 90 minutes, different float centers do different times. I do 3 different times. And you float. And all kinds of really magical things happen in that tank. There's a lot of research going on right now through the Float Tank Research Center located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're finding that it dramatically decreases anxiety, depression, PTSD. The studies are in, and it's quite remarkable. Plus, while you're in there, you absorb that beautiful magnesium that we're all deficient in. And that really is a vital mineral that relieves stress, supports the immune system, and helps regulate your blood pressure. So,
Yeah.
and then there's, floating is, I think, a lot like meditation on training wheels. If you're not used to meditating, it's a great way to kind of get into it because you're forced.
Yeah. And that's what I've experienced in there is my husband is blessed enough to be able to just sleep from the very first time. He gets in there, he sleeps, and he gets that restorative
Right.
theta. I guess you call it the theta wave.
Yeah, your brain, if you fall asleep in there, your brain does get a theta wave, and 1 hour of sleep equals 8 hours of that lovely sleep in your bed. So falling asleep in there is awesome. But if you don't fall asleep, and I don't many times, it's just a really great reset for your body and your mind.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a lot more even going on that even we know, right?
Oh yeah.
Because the brain, the body, there's so much to our body. There's so much. Yeah. Because when I go in there too, I notice I have a different experience each time. So depending on what's going on in my body, like I maybe have muscle soreness, or maybe I've got a lot going on and I need to reorganize my brain,
Right. I always try to go in, I've been floating for close to 10 years now. Not as often now as I used to because it's busy here, but I always, before I step into the tank, I really do try to set an intention of what I want to do in there, whether it's just relax or solve a problem or, heal my body. I do try to get in with an intention. It doesn't always exactly work, but it's something good to focus on right when you get in, to really focus on whatever it is you're trying to heal, whether it is mental, physical, or just relaxation.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, for like the first probably 5 times for me, I was really trying to sleep, right? and then after a while I was like, well, maybe I don't have to sleep. Maybe I'm just going to get, very relaxed, and I'm going to focus on my breathing. And then later, I started to try to really focus on the breathing, and then maybe visualize what I wanted to happen. Like you said, like an intention.
Great way to do it. Yeah, it's a great way to do it. It's just interesting that when you get in there, you may think nothing's happening, but when they've hooked people up to study this, they're finding that like people's blood pressure drops 25% in the first 5 minutes of a float.
Wow.
I mean, there are no medications that you can take and I'm not a medicine person, but it's pretty remarkable the things that they're finding with just 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So imagine what 60 minutes in there, even if you're not sleeping, what it's doing to your brain and all the parts of your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm just amazed by like the after effects sometimes, because my first time, I remember this pretty vividly, is like we went out to dinner and I was so tired. And I wanted to go to sleep because I was so relaxed. Like
Right.
I just felt so relaxed. And then, and I just, if I just get relaxed, that's enough for me to keep on
Yeah.
doing it.
There is there are some studies being done right now about it being a detoxer,
Mm-hmm.
pulling stuff out. And I don't know this for fact. I'm not going to claim to know it, but I do know that sometimes when my body's feeling really icky,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's from physical or maybe, just overdoing, and I go in there and I float, and I don't feel like it's a great float. Like I'm kind of anxious to get out and I can't really settle in. And then I get home and I'm so tired. And it actually, I believe it was a detox for me. It was pulling all that gunk out. And I could
Yeah.
just go home and truly sleep the rest of the day.
Yeah. And I see that too. Like, I feel like it's really detoxifying. I mean, the magnesium itself is probably pulling out a lot.
A lot. Right.
Mm-hmm. Because I know
Yeah.
with me and my health journey, that was the first thing I started doing when I was quitting all these processed food and alcohol, all these toxins, is I started taking Epsom salt bath, and it helped so much.
It
So
really does.
I imagine this is like 100 times
Yeah.
better.
You got 1,000 pounds of pharmaceutical grade Epsom salt in there. It's doing good stuff for your body for sure.
Yeah, and we all need that, because even if we try to live our healthiest, best lives, there's toxins in the environment, in our home. It's just everywhere. It's really hard to avoid.
You know, the other interesting thing is that a lot of NFL teams, NHL, NBA, a lot of these teams are putting these in their locker rooms for focus.
Oh.
Not only for pain relief, because obviously these athletes have a great deal of pain, but a lot for focus. So I think that's really an important key too, is that in there you can really focus on if you're dealing with a problem, an idea. I had a young man in here who was really struggling with looking outside of the box to find a solution to a problem he was having. And he floated yesterday and he got out of there. He's like, my God, I didn't sleep, but I think I figured it out.
Oh,
And that was really
wow.
cool to me. He's like, I
Well,
never would have found this solution to this problem without being in there.
wow, that's amazing. And I have experienced that with myself. Like, I just go in there and I'm sorting out everything. I try not to think about anything, but then what happens is I do find solutions to my creative problems.
Yeah, it's
Ideas
cool.
come. I mean, yeah, so it could be something for an entrepreneurial person,
Right.
or somebody that really wants to get more creative,
Yeah, it
maybe.
definitely, well, that's the theta wave, the theta wave in your brain. And when we're talking about brain waves, the theta wave, if you can get there, it does improve your creative senses and enhances your ability to problem solve. So
Mm,
that theta state again, it's really interesting. And if
yeah.
anybody's curious about what that theta state feels like, I'm sure all of you guys have experienced it when you think you're not asleep, but you're not really awake. Like it's that in between
Mm.
sense where you're not sure if you're asleep. Funny story, I had somebody come in for their first float, and I get my folks out by knocking on the backside of the tanks, and
Yeah.
I can hear when water's in there. So I went in to get somebody out and I knocked and I could hear him snoring. And I had to knock a few times, and finally he came out and he came upstairs and he said to me, gosh, I just couldn't relax in there. And I kind of chuckled to myself because it's that state of not knowing if you're awake or you're asleep. And that's a
Mm.
beautiful thing to be.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. My husband told me about that. Like he didn't think he was asleep, but then he jerked and he was like, "Oh, I'm just waking up."
Right. Well, I think he told me too, the last time he was in, he had a golf match or something, and he really focused and visualized what he was going to do. And he said he played the best round of his life,
Oh,
or close
yes.
to
Well,
it.
it was funny because we were talking about it beforehand, and he's like, "I wonder if I should visualize, my ball going into the hole and hitting all the greens, and you visualize
Right.
that in there, and it was the best round of the year. Yeah, it was. I think he shot like
Yeah. So that's
76
always
or something.
fun to hear
Yeah,
stuff like that.
it was. And
And
so
and
now he's telling all his friends about his
yeah,
experience.
well, that's true, and that's why a lot of these professional athletes use it. It's a great way to do visualizations.
Yeah, and you got to think like, how many other people could this be good for?
Oh, well, as I said when I started, if more people floated, it would be a happier place to live in the world, because it does. It's so funny to watch people come in, and I mostly see this from men. I have most of my clients are men, and
Mm,
the first time, usually their wife will bring them in begrudgingly, and they're pretty
mm.
grumpy when they get here, and they're like, "What is this?" Ho hum, and then they finish their float, and they're like a completely different person. They're lit up. They're like, sign me up. I want to come back.
Yeah.
So it is kind of fun to watch that, before and after.
Oh, I know. And then we're just completely hooked, right?
Right. Which I love because I am too. And that, I would think if you had asked most float center operators why they do it, it certainly isn't about the money.
Hmm.
All of us do it because we really believe in it. And it's changed most people's lives that I know that own float centers. It's had some sort of incremental change for people, and that's why they opened a float studio. It's something we're all passionate about, and I believe in self-care, and sometimes it's hard to fit it in, but I think it's really important in this day and age that we all take care of ourselves with so much going on in the world. There's so much stress, bad behavior, and floating is just a simple way to disconnect from it all and to reset. And it's 60 minutes out of your day. When you think of it that way, 60 minutes to feel better, it's nothing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a small price to pay. Um, let's talk about some of the precautions that come along with it. Are there
So
are there like certain people that maybe shouldn't float or
absolutely. It's a
should
very
be me?
small percentage. It's a very small percentage. I would say the person that gets the most benefit out of floating is a pregnant woman in her second and third trimester. I don't allow people to come in and float in their first trimester. Some float centers don't allow the last trimester. It's a personal choice.
Okay.
Um, my past history, I had such a horrible experience, many experiences being pregnant that first trimester and then losing a baby. And I don't want that. I don't want to be any part of that happening here, not as a result of floating, but serendipitously, whatever the word is. But pregnant women get the most out of floating for so many reasons. So anybody out there who's pregnant, your baby's heartbeat syncs with yours. You get all stress, tension release from your body. It's great for your back.
Mm.
So pregnant people are great people, but people who shouldn't float, I think a lot of float centers have different people. Mine are mostly medical based. People who shouldn't float are people that have seizure history with seizures.
Okay.
If someone have a seizure in the tank, I would not know, and that is why I won't allow anybody with any history of seizures to float. So that's a big one. People with kidney or liver failure should not float.
Oh.
People that are in cancer treatment should check with their doctors. I've had cancer people in here going through chemo, but every doctor is different. So I always suggest if you have a medical condition to check with your doctor to make sure that this is okay. My tanks don't have anything in them but water and Epsom salt. Other tanks are different. People clean different ways. Mine are very holistic in that way. So I always say, if you have a condition, check with your doctor first. But if you color your hair or have spray tan, we ask that you wait a few days before coming in.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everybody that doesn't have seizures, or I think your son asked when he was in what that word was, and I can't remember the word now, but it was fear of the dark.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I forget what that word was too, but yeah.
The other thing is, if you are experiencing vertigo while just before your float, you shouldn't get in the tank. So vertigo is one of those things, if you're currently experiencing it, you should not float. And then obviously claustrophobia. And claustrophobia is a really interesting one, because anybody who hasn't floated, when they call me to make an appointment, the first thing they say is, I'm claustrophobic. And I always kind of chuckle to myself, because as you know, we live in a small town. And if you look at the statistics, only 5% of the world is claustrophobic, truly claustrophobic. So if everybody that calls here has claustrophobia, then that 5% of the world must live here. I think it's just the fear of the unknown. It's also interesting that it's like your world opens up in there. It doesn't close you in because it's dark, right? So you have no concept of space or anything. It's like a wide open, it's almost like you're floating in the universe. So claustrophobia, if you're clinically claustrophobic, you should not come in. But not many people are.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may think they are, and they're
right.
not. They're actually not.
I think too, people, compare this to like an MRI machine that's small. This is not your MRI machine. This is a large tank that you can float around in and get out anytime. You're in complete control of your float.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it too. Even, my son didn't stay in the whole time, and you let him know everything ahead of time, which I really loved, and he got out just a little bit before,
Yeah, not much though.
No, I mean, and it kind of is all in your mind, right?
I've gotten out early before. I mean, that's what I love about it. That's your 60 minutes to do what you want. I do always suggest though, if it's your first time floating and you really don't know how much time has passed, it worries me. The first 20 minutes are rough because it's so different than anything you've ever done before. Your mind will settle. It eventually will settle. And the more you do it, it is easier to settle in. But I always hope that people give it a chance, not just stay in 5 or 10 minutes. Give it a go. And if you have to get out early, then do it. But, I always hope that people stay in and get what they can out of it. But your son did great. I loved it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and yeah, I find that I actually lose track of time. And then when I hear that knock and I see that blue light, then I'm like, oh no, I gotta get out.
Yeah.
Because then it's kind of like when I'm just starting to really get into that deep relaxation.
Right.
And towards the end. Yeah. What are some of the most common, fears that you see people have before they go in? I know we talked about some of them.
Yeah. Well, the thought of being alone with your own thoughts, I think, is really scary to a lot of people. And that's a hard one. But again, remember, your thoughts can go blank in there, which is really cool. They just kind of disappear. Sometimes when I'm in there, they're little thoughts. They feel like cartoon bubbles that are popping one right after. They just disappear.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. So I would say that's, it's the fear of the unknown. What are you going to be doing? It sounds so weird. What does it really do? Being in there alone with your thoughts. Will I drown? That's when I hear a lot. I don't swim. Will I drown? Right?
Yeah.
There's
and
no
that's
way.
the one I hear when I tell people about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, don't you just think? I'm like, no, you cannot physically think.
You can't. You will float to the top like a cork. And there's no way. There's no way to go under. So
Mhm.
that's so cool. Yeah, so that's kind of fun when people come in and they say, I don't swim, you know, am I going to be able to do this? So yeah, anybody can float no matter what size you are, how big you are, how small you are, you're going to float. And you're going to have an experience, whether it's your first time, second time, 10th time, 100th time. It's always a different experience, like you said, each time you get in there.
Yeah.
So that's when I hear, going back, I'm just trying to think what else I hear people afraid of. 60 minutes, that's a one. 60 minutes, oh my gosh, I can't believe, no, I can't stay in there for 60 minutes. So that's, you know, I always say, well, you don't have to stay in, this is your time, like we talked about before. But then the blue light comes on, they're like, no way, it's over. So I go back to try it. You know, what have you got to lose?
Yeah.
60 minutes.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, and if you don't like it, but again, I go back to try it, give it a shot twice, because the first time is really weird for some people like me. And every time you get in there, it's different. So I always really hope that people will come back twice to try it.
Yes. and get a membership. Right?
Yeah. Or,
yeah.
I love the membership people. My membership has grown tremendously since COVID. My business actually thrived during COVID because it's something people do by themselves, and it was safe. But I really do love my members. I look after my members. If someone's not coming in, I'll shoot them a text and say, are you okay? Do you want me to pause your membership? I really care, and I would say this about most float center operators, that they genuinely care about the people that come into their building. It's just the part of my job that I love, that I've made so many great friends like you. Anybody when I moved to Durango, not one person. And now I feel like I have a whole world here of people that I trust. And so that's been a beautiful part for me too, is owning this and making really heartfelt, deep relationships with my clients.
Oh yeah. I mean, and when we go to a big city, we don't get that same kind of welcome.
Right. You may go at a float center. I would say that most float center operators are like me. They really believe in what they're doing. They care about who's coming in. It's a unique bunch of people.
Well, yeah, and I haven't actually been to another one yet. I'm afraid I might be highly disappointed, but I would definitely I would give it a go. But
I don't ever want to discourage. Yeah, I don't ever want to discourage people from going to a float center in whatever city they live in. But I will say, when Durango is somewhat of a tourist town, I don't really gear towards the tourism market, because that's not who I'm interested in. I mean, I love having them, but they're not who I would spend a lot of time with. But usually people who come in to float, if they're tourists, float wherever they are. So if they're wherever they're from, they float regularly there. And then when they're out of town, they float if there's a float center anywhere around. And I do hear quite frequently that this is one of the nicer ones in the country. So I'm proud of that. I worked hard. I did a lot of research before opening this. So yeah.
Well, yeah. And now, do you think your particular tanks, are those as common as the pods, or do you see more of the pods?
So there aren't very many of my tanks really across the country. There's probably, I would say, maybe 30 float studios who have my tanks in the country.
Oh, wow.
There's probably over 2,000 float centers now in the country, maybe 2,500.
Wow.
My float tanks are really different than a pod. The way they're cleaned. I never want to downplay anybody else's float center, because I love what everybody who owns a float center does. But I really did search for the very best, and that's what I offer here at Salt 360. So it's just different than a pod, and I love pods too, but these are different.
Well, yeah, and I think like wherever you are, you need to just kind of look for what you have and use the best, with what you
Right.
can find.
Well, any float is better than no float, right?
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. And well, and if somebody wants to look for a float place facility in their area, how do they go about that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of them out there. Even small towns have them now. I would just Google flotation therapy near me, and I guarantee you most places that you will be in have them. Pretty unbelievable. And not too long ago, there were just a handful of float centers, but they're really popping up everywhere, and it's a good thing. More people
Yeah,
float.
I mean, I think everyone should try it.
For sure, and not once but twice.
Yes. Anything else that you want to tell us about floating that you think a lot of people don't know, or?
Gosh, I feel like we've covered a lot. Yeah, there is something else that people should know, I think. I have floats, people that float from the ages of 7 up to 90.
Oh,
So
okay.
a lot of younger children come in to float. They must float with their parent if they're under 13, that have autism or certain disorders, disease, whatever. So, and then I have older people that come in that it's really helpful for their joints, muscles. And again, that focus, I think sometimes when people get older, some may lose their thought process. I have a gentleman that comes in every week that's 85 and he floats once a week. And you would need to check with the float center wherever you are to see what the youngest is and what their policies are. But any age for me, it's okay as long as a parent is with them if they're under 13. And from 13 to 18, they have to have a parent or guardian here with them.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good practice. And I forgot to ask you, like, what's the youngest?
Yeah. I think 7 is the youngest I've had in here. But it's good for anybody. So
yeah, and I would think so.
And let me just think if there's anything else that I've missed. I hope not. Nothing. I mean, I can't think of anything offhand, but
there was one thing that I noticed in there too, is that it really realigns your spine.
Yes.
Like I'll go in there and it doesn't take long and I'm like cracking and.
Oh, it's so good for your spine. And actually, here's a little fun fact. When you get out of the tank, you are in fact 1 inch taller than when you got in. That is a proven fact. However, it does not last very long because you immediately go back to standing and everything compresses again. But you are 1 inch taller when you get out.
Wow.
That's always kind of fun.
Yeah, I know it really helps. It's weird because I'll go in there and I'm like, sometimes I will be super stiff, from doing things and or being stressed, and I've gone in there and I've been like a lot of pain in my shoulders, really stiff, and then I come out and it's all gone.
Yeah, that's a really neat thing about it. Everything you hear in there too, it's like your stomach growls. It's so loud in there.
Oh yeah. That's true. I have had that happen in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a good point for sure.
Well, thank you, Patti. I thank you so much for talking about floating today.
Oh my God. It was so much fun to share. And I hope that your audience will get out there and find a float center near them if they're not in Durango. Yeah. And I'll see you soon, I hope.
Oh, yes. Me and my family will be in soon, probably after the holidays.
Perfect. Well, I look forward to you all back in, and happy holidays to everybody out there.
Yes, and I will put all your information in the show notes on this podcast. Great. And I will see you soon.